I think she's muted now.
There you go.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, July 13, 2022. My name is Carla Guerra Moran, and I am the Secretary to the Fairfax County Board of Building and Fire Code Appeals. Before I turn this over to our chairman, Mr. David Conover, I will go over a few guidelines for the hearing. First, this hearing is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website after the hearing. Second, please identify yourself by first and last name each time you speak. And third, if you have any difficulties during the hearing, please email me at carla.guerra-moran@fairfaxcounty.gov. I will turn this over, Mr. Chairman, the Fairfax County Board of Building and Fire Code Appeals. Mr. Conover, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carla, and other staff of Land Development Services in the county for your efforts in setting up this meeting. For the record, it's 10:03 a.m. on Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. I would like to open the July meeting of the Fairfax County Board of Building and Fire Code Appeals, at which we'll consider a hearing on appeals scheduled to be heard at this meeting. To conduct this meeting and hearing wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, the board needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record to address appeals that have been filed with the building, property maintenance, or fire official in a timely manner. Conducting this hearing wholly electronically will be a bit challenging, so I ask you in advance for your patience. We've been doing this now a little over 2 years. I think we're getting a little bit better at it, but I think I will welcome the opportunity to get together face to face. Because each member of the board is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each board member participating to state their name and the location from which they're participating. In doing that, I would ask that each member pay close attention to ensure you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we'll vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. Okay, Darren Shoemate, are you here?
Darren's here. I'm calling in from Alexandria section of Mason District in Eastern Fairfax County.
Thank you, Darren. Rob Fisher, are you here?
I am. I'm calling in from my office in the town of Vienna.
Great. Wayne Bryan.
Yes, I am here. I'm calling in from my office in Vienna, Virginia.
George Page.
Yeah, this is George. I'm here. I'm calling in from my home in Herndon, Virginia.
Amado Fernandez. Amado, you're muted.
I am. Thank you. Amado Fernandez. I'm here from my home in Chantilly, Virginia in Sully District.
Okay. And I'm Dave Conover. I'm calling in from my home in Great Falls in the Drainsville District. So at this point, I'm going to pass the role of chairman to Darren Shoemate, the vice chairman, so I can make the following motion. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the board. I'd ask for a second and then a vote. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Amado. All those in, anybody opposed to that motion?
No.
Hearing none, the motion carries. Having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures. The fact that we're meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we've arranged for public access, including appellants and appellees on our agenda to this meeting. At this point, I'd ask Darren to take the role of chairman, and I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the board to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of the board and the physical presence of the public and appellants and appellees, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the board may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated audio video conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by calling 1-571-429-5982 and entering access code 668-37409#. I ask for a second of the motion and then we'll vote. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Amato. Is there anybody opposed to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. It's next required that all the matters addressed on today's agenda must address the emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and/or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations in the discharge of the board's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. Again, I'm going to pass the chair to Darren Shoemate and move that the matters addressed on today's agenda must address the emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and/or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of the board's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Thank you, Amato. Any opposed to the motion? Okay, the motion passes. We have 3 appeals to hear today. I would note that we have copies of all correspondence and supporting documentation on these appeals. I would ask that there are other members of the public in attendance that have not made themselves known to do so now. So all those that are other than the board members that have introduced themselves, I'm going to go ahead and let's go alphabetically. Last name. Anybody with the last name A? B? C?
Good morning, Chris Campbell. I'm a fire protection engineer and will be speaking on the 3rd appeal scheduled for this morning.
Thank you, Chris. Other C's? D? E?
Kenneth Dobbs, Officer of the Fire Marshal, Fairfax County.
Thank you, Kenneth. E? F?
Patrick Foltz from the Office of the County Attorney.
G?
Miles Glover. I'm an architect as part of the 3rd appeal.
Thank you. Any other G's? Is there an Owen Giordano?
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Foltz for the OCA. I have 2 interns who are observing this hearing, Owen
Okay.
Giordano and Charlotte Manapat Nguyen. They're both law students, rising 3Ls, who will be attorneys next year.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick. H?
Dennis Hart, Fairfax County Land Development Services.
I? J? K? L? M?
Anthony McMahon, Fairfax County Land Development Services.
Okay. Any other M's? N? O? P?
Good morning, Thomas Passarelli, President of Crown Properties, Inc., the appellant in 2 of the appeals before the board.
Thank you, Thomas. P, Q, R, S.
Good morning, Cynthia Shania, architect Hort Copeland Marks for the 3rd appeal.
Okay.
Good morning,
T.
Pramod Silwal, Land Development Service.
Thank you. T, U, V, W,
Dan Wilhelm, Building Division, Fairfax County.
okay, X, Y, Z. I did see there is someone that's muted that shows up as meeting guest.
Thanks. Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
You have your drink? Is that you?
Well,
MG, meeting
David,
guest.
David, I showed up as guest for some reason, but I'm not.
Okay. Well, okay. All right.
Owen, I don't know if Owen, Giordano Owen.
Yes, he did.
Okay.
We're okay. Okay. So, sorry for that, but I wanted to make sure everybody got on the record and we knew who was on the call. For the appeal, both the appellant and appellee can appeal a decision of the board to the State Technical Review Board. The application for appeal must be submitted to the State Technical Review Board within 21 days following the receipt of the board's decision on the appeal. Please note that a majority vote for the board is needed to overturn the building official's ruling. A tie vote goes in favor of the board, and I will only vote to break a tie if there is one. The order of the meeting with respect to the appeals we'll hear today is as follows. We'll hear the appeals dealing with the property in McLean, and the second and the third appeal we'll hear will be the one that deals with Brightview. I'd like to ask the board members and especially the county staff, Dan Wilhelm, as well as Kenneth Dobbs, since the two appeals that deal with the property in McLean appear to me to be somewhat pretty closely related, is there an issue, and I'd ask Mr. Passarelli to also weigh in on this, is there a problem if we were to hear both of those appeals at one time, hear the testimony on both of those appeals?
That would be appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Foltz for the county attorney. It's my understanding that based on contacts with the owner and observations of the site that these NOVs, the notices of violations, are moot based on compliance, and that as a result, the appeals from them would probably be moot as well. I apologize for objecting.
Well, that's okay. Well, let me ask you then at this point, if the notices of violation have been pulled, then Mr. Passarelli, if they've been pulled and there are no notices of violation, as the county just said, you're in compliance, then would you be amenable to withdrawing the appeals?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. I actually reached out to Carl, I think yesterday, to find out if those NOVs had been pulled. I haven't seen any record of that. I'd like to see a record of that before I withdraw the appeals. That would be my only concern.
Carla, can you enlighten us on, if there will be such a communication coming? What I don't want, I want to save time for everybody that's on the call, and certainly I don't want us to go through, a lot of unnecessary presentations and questioning if in fact these appeals, the notice of violation have in fact been rescinded or pulled, because the building is apparently in compliance with both the records and doing any required corrective maintenance work. Carla?
Yes, I contacted Mr. Dobbs asking if this was going to be, there was going to be a paper or something saying that it was dismissed, but it's not their authority. So, or they were going to send another notice of violation, but the case, they said the inspection was passed. So that's all I know. I did not receive anything like Mr. Passarelli was expecting, so he could withdraw his appeal.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Foltz from the county attorney. I'm happy to provide Mr. Passarelli confirmation in writing at the conclusion of this meeting that they are in fact withdrawn. But I've also, as stated on the record, it's the county's position that due to his compliance and due to the fact that everything with the current NOV has been addressed, that the compliance has been achieved and that the county is no longer pursuing these notices of violation. So to the extent that this is being recorded and is a writing, I guess that's in writing. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I accept Mr. Foltz's representation. I'm happy with that. So I will withdraw the appeals.
Thank you. I think on behalf of the board and others, and the, citizens and residents of Fairfax County, et cetera, certainly appreciate this getting taken care of. It's
Well,
very good.
Thank you, and I appreciate the time that the board has spent on the matter. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. Okay, well, what we're going to do then is immediately go to the Brightview Appeal. Certainly, Mr. Passarelli, you're welcome to sit in, but if you have other things to do, I'm sure. So for this remaining appeal, I'm going to ask the appellant to make a 1-minute summary of the basis for their appeal. And then the county I'll ask them to present a 1-minute summary of the basis for their position. And then as chair, what I'll try and do is summarize the issue to frame further presentations and discussion. Then the appellant will speak and present their case, and the board will have an opportunity to ask questions. Then the county will speak, present its case. The board will have a chance to ask questions of the county at that time. Then the appellant will have a second opportunity to provide additional information, as will the county. I hesitate to use the word rebuttal, but it's an opportunity for the appellant to respond to what they heard the county say and some of our questioning. And certainly it's an opportunity for the county to do the same thing. If either party has questions for the other, they can direct them through the chair to the other party. After each time the appellant or the county speaks, I'll provide board members the opportunity to ask questions, and the appellant or the county of the appellant or the county as appropriate. Having completed opening summaries and 2 rounds of testimony and questions, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask the board for a motion on the appeal. In a second, we'll discuss it and vote on it. I will always remind the board if something new comes up in our discussions of a motion on that appeal. After we've closed the hearing, I'm going to feel compelled to open the hearing back up to allow both the appellant and appellee to address whatever that issue was that came up. So I always encourage board members to ask any question they have while the floor is still open. When you're not speaking, please put your phone on mute. And if there's background noise or other sound that's disruptive, the county can make everybody mute, and then you're going to have to dial *6 to get unmuted. So I'd like to invite those on the call participating on behalf of the Brightview Appeal to introduce themselves and to state their affiliation. And at the appropriate time, after they're done with their 1-minute summary, I'll ask the county to do the same thing.
Good morning.
Okay.
Chris Campbell, fire protection engineer and co-consultant. I'm the appellant on behalf of Brightview Senior Living.
Thank you.
I don't know that they'll be speaking, but the architects for the project, Cynthia Shania and Miles Glover with Hord Copeland Mocht, are also present at the meeting.
And what I'll do is, if it's all right with you, Chris, is allow you to orchestrate, during your time on the floor or in responding to questions, if there's others on your team, the architects or others that you would like to call upon, I'll let you kind of orchestrate that. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh.
So to summarize, we are building a new senior living facility in Fairfax County. The design includes mechanical appliances, in this case fan coil units, which are located above the ceiling of various spaces throughout the building. They're located then within the floor ceiling assembly. Our design includes the provision of nominally 2-foot by 2-foot access panels beneath these units, per the manufacturer's recommendation, to allow for inspection, servicing, and maintenance. The county is stating that we need to provide full-size access panels to allow complete removal of these units. and they're citing Virginia Mechanical Code Section 306.1. Their interpretation of that code section says that we need to be able to replace the unit without removing permanent construction. The code does not define the term permanent construction, and the county has interpreted drywall to be considered permanent construction. This is the matter that we're appealing. We do not believe this is a correct interpretation, and it is not consistent with past county interpretations nor surrounding authorities' interpretations of this code section.
Okay, thank you, Chris. All right, who will be making the presentation on behalf of the county?
That'll be me. My name is Dennis Hart with Fairfax County Land Development Services.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So do you have a 1-minute summary?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this appeal is based on a code interpretation delivered through email correspondence with the appellant, Chris Campbell. The appellant specifically appealing Fairfax County's interpretation that a gypsum board ceiling is considered permanent construction. The appellant proposes that when an appliance is installed above a gypsum ceiling, that access for replacement can be achieved by cutting the gypsum board, removing it, and then replacing the construction. In the case of Brightview, the facility is being designed as assisted living facilities where some residents may require assistance in their day-to-day activities, while others may altogether be incapable of self-preservation. There are appliances in many of the residents' units that are above a gypsum board ceiling that require access for maintenance and replacement. And it is important to keep in mind that where these appliances are located, the gypsum board ceiling is also part of the fire-rated assembly. When an appliance is installed above a gypsum ceiling, access to the appliance not only includes access for general maintenance, such as changing filters, but also for replacement. The appliance's largest component must be able to be removed for maintenance and replacement to be able to be achieved in a timely manner when the appliance does in fact become inoperable. In this case, by arguing that gypsum board is not permanent construction, the appellant thinks that it is code compliant to remove the gypsum in a fire-rated assembly to gain access to an appliance for maintenance and replacement. 306.1 of the Virginia Mechanical Code clearly states that disabling the function of the fire resistance rated assembly or removing permanent construction, in this case the gypsum board ceiling, is not permitted for access for replacement. Fairfax County's longstanding interpretation is that gypsum board is in fact considered permanent construction, and when an appliance is installed above a gypsum board ceiling, an access door is required for service and replacement. The access door is required to be as big as the largest component of the appliance for replacement, while also keeping in mind that access for routine maintenance, such as filters, must be considered as well.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. So I'm going to summarize, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Chris for any more elaborate presentation that he has. So the issue in front of the board is the code says what it says, and we have to make a determination. The county has interpreted the code or is applying the code to this particular issue as they read the code and apply it to this particular situation, fire-rated assembly and accessibility and ability to remove a fan coil unit at some point in the future. And the appellant is disagreeing with the manner in which the county is interpreting the code and applying it to their project. Chris and Dennis, did I pretty much summarize where the issue? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I see them nodding. So I'm going to remind the board before I turn it over to Chris for his more detailed presentation. Our job is to do just that. Look at the proposed project, the arguments by the county and the appellant, Brightview, and determine whether we agree with the county's interpretation and application of the code to this project or not. Our job is not to solve this issue. Our job is not to suggest a larger opening or to suggest alternatives. It's pure and simple. Do we agree with the interpretation and application of the code to this project as presented by the county, or do we agree with the appellant's disagreement with the county and their position? So with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to request the ability to share my screen if possible.
Carla, can you do that?
Yeah, he has an option on top, on the top bar that says share. You can just click share.
Great, thank you. Are you all able
There you
to see
go.
my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I've just prepared a few slides to help through this presentation. This is all mirroring what I have described in the written appeal that you all have read already.
Thank you.
I have just summarized the county's decision. This was delivered by Mr. Pramod Silwal via email, and essentially is indicating what I just described a moment ago, stating that the county's interpretation is that a drywall ceiling is considered permanent construction, and therefore they want us to be able to replace an entire fan coil unit without removing drywall, which is then going to require a full-size access panel to allow complete removal of the unit. So that is the county's decision that we're appealing. I've just brought up the code language from the Virginia Mechanical Code. I believe many of you are going to be familiar with this, but really I think there's two items that this hinges on. One is the interpretation of the term permanent construction, and then the other is going to be access. And we'll get into both of those in just a second. So first, permanent construction. This is not a defined term in the Virginia Mechanical Code or in the Virginia Construction Code at all. In situations where the code uses a term that is not specifically defined in the code, the Chapter 2 scoping language directs us to use the ordinarily accepted meaning of the word. Our argument is that permanent construction should be viewed as something that is truly permanent to the building, which would be structure, columns, beams, things that are carrying a load. Gypsum is very commonly removed, replaced, reconfigured in a building all the time. Everyone on the board here is involved in the construction community. I think everyone has plenty of examples where gypsum wall or ceiling board has been reconfigured in some way in a building. Gypsum is not carrying a structure in any way, and you could also view this from the standpoint of the time to remove gypsum. I think with a good drywaller, you could remove a gypsum panel and replace it with a new piece of gypsum, or maybe even that same piece of gypsum very quickly, likely in less than an hour. The fact that this is commonly done and that it takes such a small amount of time, I think, is very good supporting evidence that gypsum should not be considered permanent in nature. In the appeal response that Fairfax County has provided, they have cited the definition of the word access in the Virginia Mechanical Code. I've put that definition here on the screen. Access is that which enables a device, appliance, or equipment to be reached by ready access or by a means that first requires the removal or movement of a panel or similar obstruction. And the highlight there is the underline, by means that first requires the removal of a panel. That is exactly what we're proposing here, is that you would access the fan coil unit in the event that it needed to be replaced by removing the drywall panel beneath it. So the definition that the county is citing, I believe, is exactly what we are proposing to do. I will also point out that there is a separate definition for ready access in the Mechanical Code. So access and ready access are two differently defined terms. Section 306, which is the section that we are appealing, does not require the appliance to be readily accessible. So ready access is not required by that code section, simply access is. Again, I believe that we are providing access because the definition of the word access allows us to first remove a panel prior to accessing the panel, accessing the appliance. The definition of ready access is on the screen. That would be accessing an appliance without requiring the removal of a panel. But again, we are not required to provide ready access. We're only required to provide access, and that is what we're doing. Our proposed solution that was in our original design is to provide 24-inch by 24-inch access panels in the ceiling beneath these units. This is what the manufacturer recommends for these fan coil units. These size panels allows for full servicing, adjustment of controls, and maintenance of the unit. The only activity which this size panel would not be able to accommodate would be a full replacement of the unit. Typical lifespan of a fan coil unit is 25 to 30 years, just to give you an idea of how frequently you would need to replace a fan coil unit. A few practical considerations in the event that you did have to replace a fan coil unit. Our mechanical engineer on the team has estimated this would take 1 full working day. The removal of a drywall ceiling can be done within the span of a couple minutes. Conversely, draining the refrigerant out of a fan coil unit system would take hours, and then detaching and reattaching all the connections that go into the fan coil unit would also take hours. So I bring this up to point out that the removal or the replacement of drywall is nowhere near the limiting factor in terms of time commitment if you had to replace a fan coil unit. The county is proposing that we provide a full-size access panel beneath this assembly. An image of a larger access panel is there on the screen. In this particular project, the largest access panel that we would have to provide in that case would measure 48 inches by 76 inches, very large. The county has brought up this idea of the concept that removing the drywall would disable the fire resistance of the assembly. One thing I'd like to point out is if we've established that it takes approximately 1 full working day to replace a fan coil unit, if we provided a fire-rated access panel of this size, that would provide protection for that ceiling during normal operations. However, when you're replacing the fan coil unit, the doors on this fire access panel are going to be open the entire time. So as a fire protection engineer, I can confidently say that with the doors open, you are not providing fire resistance to the underside of that assembly with those doors open. How is that any different than temporarily removing the gypsum beneath the fan coil unit and then immediately replacing it after the unit has been replaced? In other words, I think what the county is proposing we do is not offering any more protection from a fire protection standpoint than simply removing and replacing gypsum board. Finally, I'd like to bring this up. I completely understand that the board reviews all projects individually. However, the intent of of Virginia having a uniform statewide building code, in my opinion, is to help promote equivalent enforcement of the code across the entire state. We and the Brightview team have done many projects, including projects in Fairfax County, where we have not provided these full-size access panels. Again, completely understand that every project is reviewed individually, but there is a long list of precedent projects in this jurisdiction and in surrounding jurisdictions where we have not been required to provide these full-size access panels. So we're simply requesting that the county interpret this how many other authorities in Virginia and the surrounding states are interpreting this code section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Board members, questions of Chris and his team. Darren Shoemate, any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple. What is the state of design and/or construction of this facility? Was this an inspection of construction, or is this still in design?
It's currently submitted for permit.
So it's still on paper. It's not been built yet.
Correct.
Okay. My second question is the gypsum considered part of the assembly that's creating the fire separation between the floors?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, what are your thoughts on, I mean, obviously, let's say we have to replace refrigerant pipes. Let's just say there's a pinhole leak in refrigerant pipes. how would we replace those? I mean, in the current situation?
Well, if the refrigerant pipe is located, let's say directly, or the leak within the pipe is located directly adjacent to the unit, we could do that through an access panel. If the pinhole leak is downstream or upstream somewhere, we'd have to cut the ceiling anyway, even with the full-size access panel.
Okay, so like a replacement of that would require cutting of that. I mean, and the other solution is, I mean, this would be a question to the architects, is that, you know, you got a drywall ceiling because you don't want a lay-in ceiling, correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Darren. Rob Fisher?
Let me unmute. Yes, I do have one question. The access panel that you are proposing, does that have any automatic closure to it? And is that access panel rated?
Yes, our proposed panel would be fire rated and has an automatic closing device.
It does. The little 24-inch one has an automatic closing on it?
Yes, it does. It's an internal.
Okay. What about the one proposed by the county?
Yes, that they are requesting a also fire rated panel that would automatically close, just of the much larger size.
Are they both heat activated?
So it's a spring loaded door that keeps it normally closed unless you have pulled it open.
Okay, that's all I had.
Thanks, Rob. Wayne Bryan, questions?
Yes, I have two questions. The first one is, you're talking about drywall, but in reality, if you use the 24 by 24 access panel, you're really also talking about some sort of support framing, light gauge studs, T-bars, something that would also have to be removed to create this large opening, correct?
The 24 by 24 requires fairly minimal support from the structure just because it's much lighter weight. So there would be some removal of that, but again, that's only supporting itself. It's not supporting other members. So we wouldn't consider that part of the structural frame.
But the adjacent drywall, I mean, you're going to have to, there would be a subframe around that of some sort that would have to be removed as well. Something holding up the edge of that plus the edge of the drywall in those cases.
There would be some sort of support that's the 24 by 24 access panels hanging off of. And then the drywall surrounding that is just manually fastened to the underside of the joist.
That doesn't make sense. How can it be the joists have to be above that because you've got the unit in that interstitial space. So there has to be something hanging down to attach that drywall to.
Yeah, Cindy, I mean, what is is it a hanger wire that is attaching the gypsum?
No, actually, the units are in between the joists. So they're in the same plane and the joists are attached to the underside of the floor ceiling. Sorry, the drywall is attached to the underside of the floor ceiling joists.
Can you, who just spoke, can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Cynthia Shania. I'm the architect at Hort Copeland Markt.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay, I'm still not sure I understand. You really can't, you're not saying that the drywall is spanning 4 foot, 5 foot, whatever the joist spacing is, are you?
The joists are spaced to accommodate the ceiling units.
I understand, but all right. Okay, all right. My second question is that the two projects that you'd mentioned in Fairfax County, when were those built?
Cindy, can you, Chris Campbell, Cindy, would you speak to that? It's Woodburn and Fair Oaks.
Brightview Fair Oaks was completed last year in 2021, and Brightview Woodburn, I believe, was completed in maybe 2015.
Okay, thank you.
George Page, questions?
Yeah, I just one follow up on Wayne's question to Chris Campbell. Yeah, I'm familiar with these access doors. They do have a flange on the inside, and you're supposed to nail it to something. I think that's where Wayne was going with this, right, Wayne? You don't glue it to the. You don't glue
Yeah,
these.
there has to be some subframing, whether it's a, you know, some sort of iron system, a grid system. There has to be light gauge metal studs, hat channels. There has to be something there.
Right. There's usually a 1 or 2 inch flange that sticks up in there, and it's got nail holes or screw holes in it for it. Right, Chris?
Chris Campbell, yes. So the access panel itself would have additional, we'll just call it steel members to attach the flange of the panel to the joists. And sorry, Wayne, if I didn't clearly answer that before, I apologize. So yes, there is additional framing for the panel, the access panel, but the gypsum ceiling board is then just cut to fit the size of that panel. The gypsum ceiling is then supported by the underside of the joist, not by that additional framing, which is only supporting the access panel.
Okay, so my question is, if you had to remove the unit, if you had to replace the unit, not only do you have to replace that access panel, you have to replace whatever structure you have that it screws into, right? I mean, you have to remove some framing, basically.
Sure, it would simply be unscrewing that framing from the joist. So again, we're not considering this metal member to be primary structure by any means. It's just simply supporting the access panel.
No. The point I was trying to make is you've got more than just cutting out drywall. If you want to replace this unit, you've got to remove some framing around the access panel too, right?
That's true. But again, I mean, simply unscrewing a couple pieces of metal there, I don't anticipate that taking anywhere near the length of time of actually draining the refrigerant from the system and disconnecting.
Yeah. Okay. No, I see your point. I see your point. I don't have any more questions, David.
Okay. Amato, do you have any questions?
Let me unmute. Thank you. Yeah, I have some follow-up questions to Wayne. So am I understanding that the way that you are constructing the ceiling of this building is that the drywall is directly fastened to the underside of the joists that are framing the floor above, and that the unit is placed between these joists, and any ductwork is happening between the joists, so nothing is going underneath the joists? And how far apart these joists on center on your project?
Is that to Chris?
That's to Chris and his team.
Cindy, could you speak to that? Or Cindy or Miles, could you please speak to that?
Miles, can you address some of the larger units? I think the situation I was talking about was the smaller in-unit units that are between the joists. I believe some of the larger ones may have a different condition.
Hi, this is Miles Glover, architect with Horticultura Mock. So we have wood frame construction and metal, like metal composite joists. So there's really two different floor ceiling assemblies. Wood assembly, the UL assembly really does require the gypsum board to be attached directly to the underside of the structure, the joists. The Hambro floor ceiling assembly, you can suspend the ceiling directly from the joists. So I guess it differs between the two floor ceiling assemblies, but I think that for the most part, the air handling units are kind of situated to allow, the gypsum board to be applied directly to the joists without hanging it from the joists. The spacing of Hambro is typically around 4 feet on center. I would have to double check what the wood trusses are typically. It's probably pretty similar to that.
Right. typically drywall can't span 4 feet on center. Okay?
Yes.
Drywall
So
spans, you need something intermediary in order to be able to support the drywall, in order to be able to frame the ceiling.
right.
In order to cut
So-
out, in order to cut out an opening large enough to replace the unit, which would be a 48 by 76, at least per the recommended or the option that was demonstrated on the drawing, there would be intermediary framing in order to be able to have drywall. If in fact that wasn't the door, if it was a smaller door, you still have to cut out that opening in order to be able to access the unit for replacement, which means that you'd have to remove intermediary framing in order to be able to access that space, which means you'd be replacing intermediary framing as well as drywall once you put that back. And not to get too picky, but typically when you install drywall, it may take a few minutes to remove the drywall. It'll take a little more to remove the framing. And when you're putting it back, you have to finish the drywall. So finishing drywall is not a one-day operation typically. So just small details, but okay, that's my observation. Unless you can tell me otherwise, if you can correct what I've said, that your framing or your approach to the way this is being done is different than what I'm understanding.
Chris Campbell. There, you said a few things there. I'll speak to them, try to one at a time here. Certainly we have, I think, plenty of examples where we've done drywall finishing in the span of a day. So especially, I guess it depends on the size of the crew, really.
Okay.
So if you've got multiple people there, if you've got some drywall guys, some mechanical guys, our mechanical team and contractors saying that with an appropriate size team, you could do this whole replacement in one working day. Maybe a long day, but they're saying you could get it done in that amount of time. In terms of the intermediary, I mean, if there's additional, steel members supporting the drywall and or supporting the access panels, yes, those may have to be temporarily detached or in some way moved so you could fully remove the unit. Again, I think though the argument I made previously still stands that that's on the span of minutes to do some sort of screw or fastener detachment compared to hours draining the refrigerant out of your fan coil system.
Okay, I have no more questions.
Okay, I have no questions at this time. So I'm going to turn the floor over to the county, and floor is yours. And Dennis, as I did with Chris, I'll let you orchestrate if there are others with the county that you want to speak. I'll let you orchestrate that. So the floor is yours, Dennis.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dennis Hart, Fairfax County. I think, let me get situated here. I think it's important to get into, for this, we're kind of the code path and how we follow it here. So we would start with a 3061. That's out of the mechanical code for access. And this is what tells us that we need access for service, repair, and replacement of these appliances above a gypsum ceiling without disabling the function of a fire rated assembly or removing the permanent construction. So that takes us, that's obvious. That's been our stance the entire time. The key is disabling the function of a fire resistance rated assembly or removing the permanent construction. And it sounds like even as we get more into this, it's not just a gypsum wallboard issue. It's also a framing issue. And framing, I think, is definitely considered permanent construction. I don't see how we could argue that otherwise. But let's get into the definition of access from Chapter 2, okay? And I'll read it to you. That which enables a device, appliance, or equipment to reach by ready access or by means that first requires the removal or movement of a panel or similar obstruction. So it states it, and Mr. Campbell talked about ready access a little bit, but that which enables a device, appliance, or equipment to reach by ready access or by means that first requires removal of a panel or similar obstruction. So we don't have ready access. We don't have access where we can just reach up and touch it, essentially. We have to have access by removal or movement of a panel or similar obstruction. A gypsum board, piece of drywall screwed to the ceiling or however it is not considered a panel in the respects that you can remove it and replace it, and the integrity of the ceiling system is still intact. You would have to remove the gypsum drywall, unscrew it, cut it, whatever you do, remove the framing. The intent of this is to be able to have some sort of access door, or you could have a drywall panel and if it's in a non-fire rated assembly possibly, but it would have to be a removable type. I've seen them where they're framed out with some sort of trim, and it's just a drywall panel framed out and sits inside of a ceiling possibly. So just understanding why we are required access and what requires the access with this panel or similar obstruction. So moving forward to my next thought, the ordinary meaning. So permanent construction, the definition of permanent construction is not in the definition section. And chapter 2 requires you to essentially go by the ordinary meaning of, and I agree with Chris on that thought, but the ordinarily accepted meaning of permanent construction and what they're saying that it is. And then give me a second here with my notes. They're quoting the Merriam-Webster dictionary, not easily removed, washed away, or erased. A more appropriate definition and in Fairfax County stance is lasting or intended to last or remain unchanged indefinitely. We feel that is what fits more as the ordinary definition of permanent construction. Maybe the definition for permanent by itself, not easily removed, washed away, or erased, but permanent construction is what we're talking about here. And that's talking about your drywall and especially your framing members in these situations. So they've also quoted a list of common reasons to remove gypsum wallboard, and most of these are moot points anyway. It's still considered permanent construction. You're just giving us a list of reasons why we are swapping out the drywall due to water damage, wear and tear, damage to the gypsum. It still doesn't mean that it's not permanent construction. They quote removal and replacement in order to access piping or electrical circuits located with the wall or ceiling. I know from my experience, code requires access to junction boxes, valves, etc. So an access door would have to be installed in those situations as well. I've never been in a situation where I've seen or allowed somebody to cut a hole in a ceiling to access a valve. That's just not something that's compliant. He stated that the manufacturer requires only access for service in the manufacturer's installation instructions. 112.3.1 of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code essentially says if you have a conflict between the manufacturer's installation instructions and the code, that the most stringent requirements would apply, and in this case, the code would apply, requiring the access for replacement. Also, we have the fire rated assembly integrity. That's the big one here. That's the big one that I don't see where we could go around it because it's a fire rated assembly, and we have to cut the fire rated assembly to gain access to this unit. And it's clear in 306.1 that you cannot disable the function of a fire resistant rated assembly. By cutting part of the fire rated assembly access equipment, this disables the integrity of the system, and Fairfax County does not necessarily agree with the safety taking a back set for aesthetics, as the applicant noted in their position letter. And then in conclusion, honestly, I think our statement in our position letter speaks for itself. Fairfax County interprets 306.1 of the Mechanical Code to mean that access is required for both maintenance and replacement of an appliance. No permanent construction can be removed. No fire rated assemblies can be disabled to gain access for the maintenance and replacement. And in the case of Brightview, it's an assisted living facility where safety is paramount. And they intend to install the appliances above a fire-rated ceiling that the gypsum board is part of, then gain access for replacement of that appliance. They intend to disable the fire-rated assembly by cutting it, removing it, and replacing it after the appliance has been replaced. This is not a code compliant installation. 712.1.13.2 is an access door section for horizontal assemblies, which in this case it is. And it says access doors shall be permitted in ceilings of fire resistance rated floor ceiling and roof ceiling assemblies, provided that such doors are tested in accordance with ASTM E119 or UL 263 as horizontal assemblies and labeled by an approved agency for such purpose. So this is where you get the allowance for the access doors in this fire rated assembly. I can't find anywhere in the code where you can cut a hole in the ceiling to gain access in a fire rated assembly, especially. I ask the board to please rule in favor of Fairfax County. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Darren Shoemate, questions for the county? Darren, you might be muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to be polite. I'm going to kind of frame my thought process. Of course, I'm an MEP engineer, and I've designed buildings with fan coil units above the ceiling with access panels. And I think Chris mentioned that a fan coil unit has got a 25 to 30 year lifespan. It's probably more realistic 12 to 15, but either way, it's an infrequent thing. And I'm just in general.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you have a question for the county?
Yes. If you have a building, that say had an air handling unit that needed to be replaced, and the only way to get that out, you had to tear the wall down to get it out, would that be a code violation? You have an air handling unit room that's around an air handling unit, and it's a fire rated room, but it's crapped out for whatever reason, and you got to replace it, and the only way to do it is to tear the wall down. Do we just not do it? Do we abandon it in place? I mean,
Code requires access for removal of the piece of equipment. So you would have to if you get a 10 by 10 unit, you'd have to have a 10 by 10 opening to get it out, or it would have to be able to be taken apart and be essentially the largest component is how large your access hole would need to be in that.
Okay. Do you agree with what Mr. Campbell said as far as if we were to have a 4 foot by 7 foot access panel and it's open, that while it's open, that we would not have a fire rating, the fire rating would be compromised?
No, because they are spring loaded. So they should spring back into place. And that was according to Mr. Campbell's testimony and according to the listing of the.
But you would block them open to do construction. Would they have a fusible link? I mean, it just seems to me that if they're open, that you've lost what you're trying to keep.
They would have a self-closing mechanism.
Okay, that's all I got.
Rob Fisher, questions for the county?
No,
Rob,
sir.
you might be muted.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, sir. No questions from me.
Wayne Bryan.
They do not have any questions.
George Page.
Yeah, I have a question for Dennis. Dennis, I checked I looked through the Carrier line of products and looked at their installation manuals, and it seems that these things are designed to be concealed, and yet I know that the code and concealed to me means concealed, in a wall or a ceiling, and I know that the code says you have to have access large enough to replace the whole thing. You mentioned that if the manufacturer's installation recommendations and the code don't agree, then the most stringent requirement applies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So why would an access panel be more stringent than a piece of drywall if fire or safety is concerned?
if you look in the package with the manufacturer installation instructions, I'm going to it too while I'm on the phone. The installation, the indoor unit shall be installed on a location that meets the following requirements. There's enough room for installation and maintenance. So
I know, I've read that several times over again. I'm just asking you, why would the building code in this case be the more stringent requirement? Because if you have to replace the unit, you're going to make a hole in the ceiling, for at least for the time it takes to replace it.
Because 306.1 requires access for replacement.
But
that is the most stringent because the installation instructions do not necessarily require that. So access for the code is access for replacement, which means you have to be able to take the entire piece of equipment or appliance out of in one piece or the largest component that is that breaks it down.
But wouldn't you agree that the installation recommendations for carrier products and the code aren't the same?
They are not the same.
Okay, so the most stringent one prevails, right?
Correct.
Okay, so again, I'm going to ask you, if it's fire and safety is the issue, what's more stringent, having a piece of drywall over it or having a panel that opens and closes?
The code requires that a access door is installed.
Okay.
Patrick Foltz for the county. Patrick Foltz for the county. If I can address a couple questions that have been brought up by the board.
Dennis, are you okay? You okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, sir. Patrick Foltz for the county attorney.
Yeah.
It seems as though the way to harmonize the different code requirements, with particular note to the idea of which is more stringent, would be to consider maybe the whole of the circumstances of these maintenance situations and when there are no maintenance going on. Even if there is a 12 to 15-year lifespan, we can assume that for almost all of the days that these units are in place, there will not be maintenance. In that situation, the fire rating is met both by the gypsum board and by the fire rated door, whatever it turns out to be. Whatever the fire rated door installed is provides that fire protection. In the instance where it's being replaced, and since the code contemplates replacement and maintenance, and since it also requires self-closing doors, I think what might be implied there is that the maintenance will always be attended by a person. And if there is a fire incident or if there is a situation where there's a gap in the fire protection, that the person doing the maintenance or the replacement would have the wherewithal to close the fire door before they left the building themselves. And even if they did not, it would spring load shut. And that the fire protection would always be provided in a instance where the unit is not being paid attention to by a person, for lack of a better term, personally. I hope that helps. I have the least expertise of anybody here. Thank you.
No, actually, that does help. Thank you very much. I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Okay. Amato?
I don't have any questions.
You might be muted.
Oh.
I heard him.
Yeah, we heard him. We're good.
Yeah, I don't have questions.
Okay, I have, I guess, one, could be two. Typically, let's go down the road, and these are built as the Brightview would like to see them built, and I'm going to replace one of these air handling units. Do I need to get a permit?
Yeah, yes, you would. So you would need to get a permit and possibly a plan review to replace a fire rated assembly. Yes.
Okay, so and so that permit, I'm assuming then, would cover this fire rated assembly issue. I was looking at the State Fire Protection Code, section 701.2, where fire resistance rated construction shall be maintained. So if I'm getting a permit, then the county would, as you suggested, my question is, do plan review and inspection of not only the replacement unit and associated piping and connections and so on, but under that permit would also re-inspect the fire rated construction that might be rebuilt if the Brightview decided, we're into cutting drywall. Is that correct? In other words, you've got a chance 5 years down the road, 10 years, they're going to come in, get a permit for, X number of these units when they need to be replaced.
They would need to have a building permit and possibly a mechanical permit too. They may not need that for an exact replacement of one of these units for a mechanical,
Okay.
but definitely a building permit for the fire rated assembly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's it for. So I'm going to turn the floor back over to Chris Campbell. If you have any further additional new information that you'd like to provide, input in relation to questions you've heard from us to the county or what the county has said.
Thank you, Chris Campbell. It seems like this debate is really hinging on two components, the definition of permanent construction and maintaining a fire resistance rating for the floor ceiling assembly. Again, our argument is that drywall should not be considered permanent construction. All of you have been in the building and construction community for quite some time. I think everyone here can think of many instances where drywall has been repaired, replaced, removed, relocated, any number of ways it's been modified in a building. That happens all the time. In my office suite, in the last 3 years, we've had a pipe leak behind drywall, which required us to remove drywall to access the point of the pipe that was leaking. We've done an interior alteration to the office suite, which involved removing drywall, and relocating an interior partition. There's many situations that occur very frequently in the construction community where we relocate drywall. All that to say, I think that supports the argument that drywall should not be considered permanent construction. The second piece about maintaining the fire rating, some of the board members brought this up, but as a fire protection engineer, while that fire door or access hatch is open, you're not protecting the unit. I would say if we can agree that it's going to take approximately 1 day to complete a replacement of a fan coil unit, that the contractors are likely going to prop that door open so it's not continually slamming shut in their face while they're trying to access the unit. So I don't believe that in that intermediate period, an open access door is affording any more protection than cutting the gypsum. To the point about getting a permit, I would agree that a permit would be necessary to replace the fan coil unit in its entirety. And I would offer up that if the county is concerned about the protection in that intermediary replacement period, then require us to have a fire watch in the building. There's many things that we can do to offer temporary protection in the approximately 1 day period where there would be an open ceiling there. Again, that's done all the time. How often do we open up a wall, or how often do we relocate a wall that requires a fire rating? I mean, that is a frequent occurrence in the construction community, and it's very frequent per the Virginia Fire Prevention Code when you have a level of diminished protection for a temporary time to provide some sort of protection plan, whether it's a fire watch, whether it's some other actions. There's many things that can be done to offer protection in that intermediate period. So would just urge the board to consider those points, and also that many jurisdictions in this area, including Fairfax County in the past, have taken what we believe is a more reasonable interpretation of this code section.
Thank you. Further questions from the board to Mr. Campbell? Darren?
No more questions.
Rob? If anybody has any, speak up.
None for me. Thank you.
Going once, going twice. Okay, Mr. Hart.
I stand by my previous testimony and ask the board to please rule in favor of Fairfax County. Thank you.
Okay. Last questions. Going once, Going twice? Okay. At this point, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'm going to ask a member of the board to make a motion to either deny or uphold the appeal. And if it gets a second, then we will have a motion on the floor for the board to discuss. Is there a motion? Motion to deny or motion to uphold the appeal?
Dave, this is Rob Fisher. I would make a
Yes.
motion, or I make the motion to uphold the county's decision. So I'm sorry. I make the motion to deny the appeal.
Okay. And is there a second?
Yeah, this is George Page. I'll go with Rob to deny.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to deny the appeal. Discussion.
Yeah, I'll go first. This is George Page.
Sure.
Regardless of how some of us feel about burying something in the ceiling that is or isn't accessible through a panel, I don't think the board has the authority to waive the code. So I'm gonna, that was my reason for agreeing with Rob that we should deny it. I do believe the code's pretty clear about this.
Okay. Any other discussion? Going once. Darren, I see you moving closer to your screen.
Yeah, so I look at this as now basically not allowing any sort of gypsum ceilings in buildings where you'd have mechanical units above, and requiring all mechanical units to be in basically a closet. And it then becomes, impractical, and it's a pretty significant, that is a sea change in a lot of the way these buildings are designed. And it does not seem to me to be the intent of the code. Again, I know the intent of the code is for safety, but the whole idea of having a permanent access door for something that you would only do once every 15 years just doesn't make sense. And I think Chris has argued, and I agree with his argument, that opening up a 4-foot by 8-foot door so you can do the construction, frankly, you lose that anyway. And frankly, my guess is in 15 years, if you're worried about replacing these things, you're also worried about replacing refrigerant piping, and then you're tearing down the whole ceiling anyway. And that's really addressed, in my opinion, by what Dave said, is that's a whole new scope. That's a whole new scope that's addressed at a future date and addressed then. And I've been involved as a licensed professional engineer with projects that have required a fire watch during temporary phases of construction. So my view is that this is a way undue burden on a project for something that may or may not happen ever. It may never happen. So you have an access door that you don't really need. The 2x2 you need to change filters to whatever they're doing, whatever the maintenance on these things is. But that's kind of my overarching view, is that going in with a drywall saw, and even if you have to cut studs to get to it, you can have that done in a day. I mean, I've been on projects where that kind of stuff is done very, very quickly, and with a well-organized and focused crew, you can do it. So I really don't think the intent of this is to have major, a typical floor might have 40 fan coil units in the ceiling, and it's just, I think it's an undue burden. I don't think it meets the intent of the code.
Okay.
I'd like to respond to Darren, and you make a really good point here, but the problem is that I can't get my head around the idea that drywall in the ceiling of my house is not permanent construction. I can't get my head around that.
I guess the other thing is, I'm not even sure what the ownership level is. I don't know if the residents own their units or they rent or whatever, but honestly, I even the idea of a 24 by 24 access to change filters and so forth seems inadequate. I understand that's what the manufacturer has suggested, but I think it's a lot to ask a resident or it just increases the mess. In residential construction, we do drywall repairs all the time. We tear ceilings out, and it requires you to cover everything in the room because the drywall dust is so pervasive. I just think you're really asking for more than is reason. Now you got to repaint the ceiling. It's not going to match. You got to paint the whole ceiling. To me, the code is pretty clear, and I think that idea that it's a minor drywall repair to replace that unit, you can get the drywall back in a day for sure, and you will have reassembled your firewall. But you've got 2 or 3 more days worth of a block coat, a skim coat, sand, paint. So I think suggesting that removing the drywall to repair this, even if it is once every 12 to 15 years, is a lot. So, and like George says, I have a hard time getting around the code. It's pretty clear.
Okay. Wayne or Amato, do you have any comments?
I think this is a real difficult one. I think that where I'm struggling with this is, what's in the code, and the interpretation of the code seems to go towards the county. The other aspect of this is, these are I'm assuming rental units or but we're really also kind of stating that if we allow this to happen, it could be for condominiums or other sort of things where people own those units, and now all of a sudden they have to replace a fan coil unit, and whether they're on the hook for tearing out a bunch of drywall and putting it back, and whether that's all done, per the code and permits and all that. So that's a little concerning. So this is a tough one, but I'm kind of with George. I'm having a hard time getting around what the code says.
Okay, Amato, do you have any additional thoughts?
No, I think it is I agree with what's been said in general, that it's a difficult choice, but I think to respond to, you have to plan for where this is, you have to plan for how you would do this, and creating removing large sections of drywall in order to replace a unit, I think and framing, I just don't think that's in line with what's being asked by the code. So that's all.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the floor, and we've had discussion. The motion is to deny the appeal. Darren Shoemate, how do you vote? Yes or no?
Oh, God, I'm thinking about this. Come back to me later.
Okay. Rob Fisher.
Aye. I'm in support of the motion.
Okay. Wayne?
Yes.
Brian? Yes. George Page?
This is George. I support the motion.
Yes. Amato?
Yes.
Yes. Darren Shoemate?
No, I vote no.
Okay. And as chair, I'm recording myself as chairman, not voting. So the appeal is denied 4-1, chairman not voting. I'd remind the appellant that you have, I forget exactly what the time frame is. I think it's 30 days if you want to appeal this further. I think you can do that with the State Technical Review Board. And I'm sure the county can provide you information on how to do that. I'm looking through my prior notes to get the specifics. State Technical Review Board within 21 days following the receipt of our decision. And you've just received the vote. So with that, I'm going to close the July meeting of the Appeals Board and thank the members, thank those speaking on behalf of the county, as well as the appellants team from Brightview. And with that, I'll call the meeting closed and wish you a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So
And
long.
thanks to the county for setting this up. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.